She once convinced herself that affection alone could sustain a relationship. If there was at least a spark of tenderness between them, she thought, perhaps they could remain loyal. Perhaps love could be enough to make everything work. It was a quiet hope she clung to, a fragile belief in something that now felt painfully naive. Her lips tightened, and a quiet tremor passed through her. The ache in her chest hardened into anger, into disbelief. The word clinch echoed the way her heart gripped itself shut, holding back the flood of emotion that threatened to spill out. "And this is how you betray me?" The thought seared through her mind like fire. The trust she had built, the affection she had offered so freely, all shattered in an instant. Standing there, she could barely recognize the life she thought she knew. "Nayang," he murmured, his voice low and sickeningly gentle. "I like women who are soft and tender, just like you." He spoke as if confessing a truth, yet every word dripped with cruelty. "Your older sister's cold as stone. Even in bed, I feel nothing with her." The words cut deeper than any blade could, each one a deliberate twist meant to excuse his betrayal. His body glistened with sweat, breath uneven, expression weary. But behind him, in the dim light of the doorway, she stood frozen, eyes wide with shock, disbelief etched into every line of her face. The man before her was no longer the one she had loved. He was the embodiment of her heartbreak. Their laughter echoed cruelly in the dark, careless and mocking. "Yeah, she's kind of like that," one of them sneered. "I thought she was the corpse of something," the other replied, their words cutting deeper than they realized. The scene was empty of empathy, just the sound of ridicule echoing in a void, slicing through the fragile remnants of someone's dignity. Her eyes burned with restrained fury. The pain in her heart twisted into a sharp glare, her crimson irises trembling with emotion. "What right do you have to talk about me like that?" she thought, her voice trembling inside her mind. It wasn't just the insult. It was the way they spoke so easily, as if her feelings were invisible, as if she wasn't even human. Her jaw tightened, her lips pressing together until they trembled. The sound of her teeth grinding filled the silence. Grit. "How trashy," she got bitterly. There was disgust in her voice, but it wasn't just for them. It was also for herself, for letting them hurt her again, for still caring enough to feel pain. In the heavy darkness of her mind, she could hear her own voice, trembling, but firm. "Get it together, So-young." It was a quiet command, a plea to herself to stay strong, to not break down, to not give them the satisfaction of seeing her crumble. Taking a deep breath, So-young pulled herself together. She adjusted her bag on her shoulder and forced her trembling hands to move. The sound of fabric brushing against itself, "fwip," was a small, grounding comfort. Her face was calm now, though her heart was anything but. She stepped away from the doorway, from the betrayal, from the humiliation, determined to leave it all behind, even if the pain followed her into the night. Her hands trembled slightly as she reached into her bag, the weight of betrayal still heavy in her chest. But she steadied herself, forcing her emotions into focus. "First, I need to record this as proof," she thought, her expression cold and resolute. The time for tears was over. Now all that mattered was evidence, something undeniable, something that would make them face what they had done. Meanwhile, in the room beyond, he spoke with shameless arrogance, his tone dripping with mockery. "So, Nayang," he murmured with a smirk, leaning closer. "What's he like? He's not as good as me, right?" Huh. His words were a cruel taunt, not just to the woman beside him, but to the one silently watching from the shadows. The woman beneath him blinked, startled and confused. Who? Young Heck?
she asked softly, her voice uncertain, her mind fogged by the moment. She didn't realize the danger, the cold fury simmering just beyond the door, the recording quietly capturing every word.
"He doesn't even come close," the man barked out, his pride swelling with every syllable. But he didn't notice the faint glimmer of a phone hidden in the shadows, the soft red line moving across the screen, marking each second of his betrayal.
The proof she needed was there, cold and unrelenting, recorded forever. And then came the cruelest words of all. "That guy's impotent." The sentence cut through the air like poison, vulgar and humiliating. For so young, standing outside that door, it was the final strike, the moment her heartbreak turned to something darker, colder. Her trembling stopped. In its place was silence and resolve. Her footsteps echoed softly against the cold ground, step, step, as she walked with a purpose that masked her trembling heart. "If Father steps in, this will all be handled," she told herself, clinging to that fragile hope. Her hands clenched at her sides, not out of confidence, but desperation, a child's last faith in the one person who had always remained distant. After all, she thought, her pace quickening as if her belief could summon strength. At the end of the day, I am his daughter. Maybe, just maybe, this time he'll see her. Maybe just once he'll... Her thoughts trailed off into uncertainty, swallowed by the sound of her own footsteps and the hollow rhythm of hope echoing through her chest. Memories flooded back, a younger version of herself standing before him with bruised cheeks and tear-streaked skin. "Please," her lips trembled, her palms pressed together in a prayer born from fear rather than faith. Her eyes wide and pleading searched his for warmth that never came. Each second of silence that followed had burned deeper than any wound. And then his face, cold, rigid, unmoved. The faintest curl of disgust at the corner of his mouth. There was no comfort in his gaze, only judgment, only the shadow of disappointment that had haunted her for years. He had never raised his voice, but the silence he left in his wake screamed louder than any reprimand. Now, years later, she walked once more toward that same wall of silence, her head bowed, but her heart whispering with the quiet plea. "Listen to me, won't he?" The thought was small, almost pitiful, dissolving into the pale light that surrounded her. She wanted to believe that somewhere beneath his sternness, a father's love still existed, that this time he might hear her, not as a disappointment, but as his daughter. Her fingers tightened unconsciously, clench, as she stood in the middle of the room trying to calm the tremor in her hands. Every step that had led her here weighed on her shoulders, but she couldn't afford hesitation now. The soft rustle of her skirt and the faint sound of her slippers against the floor echoed in the quiet space, reminding her that she had to stay strong. This was not the time to falter. The room she entered was neat and austere, filled with the scent of old books and faint traces of coffee. A vase of white lilies sat on the table, their petals already beginning to wilt, delicate, yet stubbornly holding their form. The muted colors of the room matched its owner perfectly, cold, composed, and untouched by time. Behind the desk sat her father, silver-haired, sharp-eyed, the weight of authority etched into every line of his face. He didn't look up immediately, his gaze fixed on the papers in his hand. When he finally spoke, his tone was clipped, indifferent. "What do you want?" There was no warmth in the question, only obligation. He set his cup down with precise care, the sound of porcelain meeting wood echoing faintly in the stillness. The paper in his hand crinkled as he gripped it, his expression unreadable. On the desk lay neatly stacked documents, signatures, and formal agreements, things that had always seemed to matter more to him than people did. He was a man of rules, not emotions, and she had long learned to fear that fact. But this time, So Young refused to let fear control her. Taking a deep breath, she lifted her head and met his eyes with calm determination. "Father," she said firmly, her voice steady despite the storm within her, "I'm calling off the engagement." And in her mind, a quiet reassurance followed. "It's okay, So Young." For once, the words weren't her father's. They were her own. She stood before him, back straight, clutching the document in her hand, a thin sheet of paper that seemed to carry the weight of everything she had endured. Across the desk, her father sat in silence, his sharp eyes scanning the lines with quiet scrutiny. Between them stretched years of distance and unspoken words, the kind that no letter or apology could ever bridge. Her fingers brushed against the cold surface of her phone, and for a brief moment, she felt her pulse quicken. "This time, I have actual proof," she thought. Her hand tightened around the device. It wasn't just a phone. It was her weapon, her shield, and her truth. The recording stored inside would be impossible to deny. "So, I can tell him confidently," she reminded herself. Her thumb lingered on the edge of the phone, and she exhaled slowly. For once, she wasn't approaching him as the timid daughter, desperate for approval. She was here as someone wronged, someone finally ready to stand her ground. She looked up at him with calm determination, her voice steady. "I've thought about it seriously these past few days, Father." The words left her lips with surprising clarity. The faint swoosh of her hair brushing her shoulder broke the heavy stillness in the room. Every syllable felt like a small act of defiance, yet also of freedom. Her hands rested neatly before her, but her heart pounded beneath the fabric of her dress. "I'll be breaking things off with Dongsung," she began, the name sharp on her tongue. It was the first time she'd ever spoken those words aloud, and though her voice was soft, it carried a power she had never felt before. The power of truth, finally voiced. The sound of shattering glass pierced the heavy silence in the room. Shatter. Papers fluttered to the ground as if startled by the noise. The father sat behind his large desk, his face dark with barely restrained fury, while the daughter stood before him, her back straight but her hands trembling slightly behind her. Despite the sunlight streaming through the window, the atmosphere was suffocatingly cold, tension hanging between them like a drawn blade. His voice was low and dangerous, each word dripping with menace. "Say that one more time." The threat in his tone made her heart lurch violently against her ribs. Thump. The world around her seemed to blur, replaced by a swirl of black and red, the air thick with anger and fear. Her body began to tremble uncontrollably. The sound of her heartbeat filled her ears. Thump, thump, as she struggled to steady herself. Her hands clenched tightly by her sides, knuckles white against her dark skirt. Despite the fear crawling up her spine, she refused to let it consume her. "Stay strong, So Young," she reminded herself silently, even as her knees felt weak. "You can't waver here." The words echoed in her mind, her only anchor against the suffocating wave of dread that threatened to crush her. The darkness of her father's fury loomed large, but she knew that if she faltered now, all her resolve would be for nothing. Her trembling fingers gripped the phone tightly, the smooth surface slick against her cold hands. Squeeze. Gathering all her courage, she steadied her breathing and finally spoke, voice quivering yet determined. "Father,